Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u još jedno izdanje emisije Granice Istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Nakon investiranja više milijardi dolara u Afganistan, Washington je posmatrao kako se tamošnja vlada i vojska ruše kao kula od karata u samo nekoliko dana poslije povlačenja američkih snaga. Mnogi analitičari su povlačili paralele između pada Saigona pod komunističku vlast 1975. i Kabula pod talibansku 2021. godine. Povlačenje iz Afganistana može imati posljedice i za geopolitičku bitku koja se vodi na Bliskom istoku, gdje Kina, Rusija, Turska i Iran već rade na popunjavanju američkog vakuma i nagovještavaju uspostavljanje zvaničnih odnosa sa talibanima, a neke države su spremne priznati njihovu vladu u Kabulu. U nastavku analiziramo ljudsku i financijsku cijenu rata u Afganistanu. Razgovaramo i o interesima susjednog Pakistana, zemlje koju mnogi terete da podržava talibane. Prije razgovora sa našim gostima pogledajmo uvodni prilog. Američke snage izvršile su invaziju na Afganistan u oktobru 2001. godine, tvrdeći da je tadašnja talibanska vlada pružila utočište Osame bin Ladenu, vođi Al-Kaide, koga je američka administracija teretila za napade na SAD 11. septembra. Rat u Afganistanu trajao je 20 godina, a to ga čini najdužim američkim vojnim angažmanom u historiji. Tokom tih 20 godina promijenila su se 4 američka predsjednika: George Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump i Joe Biden. 800.000 američkih vojnika služilo je u Afganistanu od oktobra 2001. godine do danas. Uz američke, koalicijski vojnici iz ukupno 51 države također su služili u Afganistanu. Kako su godine prolazile, broj američkih vojnika je rastao. Na početku 2002. godine bilo ih je samo 5.000. Zatim je ta brojka 2006. porasla na 20.000, potom na 110.000 vojnika 2011. godine, da bi nakon toga počela postepeno opadati na 25.000 2014. godine i konačno na 4.000 vojnika 2020. godine. Na vrhuncu američkog vojnog prisustva u Afganistanu cijena rata porasla je na 100 milijardi dolara godišnje. Uz redovnu vojsku veliki je broj pripadnika privatnih zaštitarskih firmi, poznatih kao Private Military Contractors ili PMCs. Njih je često bilo više nego pripadnika američke vojske, a njihove žrtve, ranjeni i ubijeni nisu ulazili u zvaničnu vladinu statistiku. NATO je, kao savez, zvanično bio uključen u afganistanski rat sve do decembra 2014. godine. Nakon isteka mandata, NATO je zadržao 13.000 vojnika koji su obučavali afganistansku vojsku i pomagali u antiterorističkim operacijama. Od početka rata do danas ubijeno je 3.500 koalicijskih vojnika, od toga 2.448 Amerikanaca. Stradalo je i 3.846 pripadnika privatnih američkih sigurnosnih firmi. 20.600 američkih vojnika je ranjeno. To je mala cifra u poređenju sa brojem ubijenih afganistanskih vojnika i policajaca. Naime, procjenjuje se da je ubijeno 65.000 pripadnika afganistanskih sigurnosnih snaga. Istovremeno, od kada su Ujedinjeni narodi počeli voditi evidenciju o broju ubijenih afganistanskih civila 2009. godine, ubijeno je ili ranjeno 110.000 ljudi. 3,7 milijuna afganistanske djece ne ide u školu zbog neimaštine i nesigurnosti. Ukupna cijena rata u Afganistanu iznosi 2,26 biliona, odnosno 2,26 hiljada milijardi dolara. Taj iznos nastavit će se otplaćivati sve do 2050. godine i tada će zbog kamata iznositi otprilike 6,5 biliona, odnosno 6,5 hiljada milijardi dolara. Troškovi će rasti ne samo zbog kamata, već i zbog obaveza američke države prema ratnim veteranima i njihovom liječenju. Idemo slikom do Richmonda u Virginiju, dakle nam se uključuje Maurice Naylon, bivši oficir američke vojske koji je služio u Afganistanu kao vojnik i kasnije u svojstvu vojnog savjetnika. Također je autor knjige Novo ministarstvo istine. Maurice, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, first of all, how do you, as a former U.S. Marine Corps officer who has served in Afghanistan, feel about the U.S. pullout? I mean, has it been too quick, too careless, too messy?
At face value, it's absolutely heartbreaking seeing what's going on in Afghanistan. for any of the US veterans or veterans of any country who've served in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, I think the images coming out of the Kabul airport are very difficult to see. Operationally, I'd say I think some mistakes were made to accelerate a troop withdrawal before civilians were safe in an active war zone. With that said, I think there's a danger in long-term policy analysis focusing too much on this withdrawal itself, because I think it's going to lead to people ignoring the failures of the last 20 years.
Afghanistan is essentially back to where it was in 2001, except that Al-Qaeda's leader, Osama bin Laden, is dead. So what has the US achieved in strategic terms after having spent billions of dollars, having killed so many local Afghani civilians and maimed numerous others, and having lost so many 2,500 soldiers of its own and numerous private military contractors?
I think from a strategic perspective, there have been few gains. And I think there have been significant setbacks. And I think that's something that the United States needs to examine in depth. In particular, I argue that this is an example of military intervention not leading towards some concrete, achievable political objective. So to me, that's setting yourself up for failure from back in 2001. When we have no clearly defined political objective to be achieved with the military means that we've committed, that sets everyone up on the ground up for failure, because there's no overarching political objective that's been defined that we as the troops on the ground can achieve.
So what you're saying is that from the very start, there was no clear military objective in Afghanistan?
I would argue that there was no clear overarching political objective. Military shouldn't be committed for the sake of military commitment. It should only be used to achieve some greater political objective. But over the past 20 years, I would argue that the United States never clearly defined a political objective that could be achieved by the military means that we committed to Afghanistan. And to me, that's a betrayal of all the troops that have been sent there without that overarching objective.
Now, what was wrong with the Afghani National Army? Why did so many people desert its ranks? Why did they surrender to incoming Taliban forces? Why did the whole structure collapse within a week or so?
I can only speak anecdotally, looking at my time in Afghanistan from 2014 to 2015, and from reading and speaking with other veterans. But my opinion on it is that it was never the willingness to fight of the Afghan soldier on the ground. That existed. That always has existed. Where there were failures were in the large-scale logistical support to those soldiers on the ground. If soldiers can't feed themselves, if they don't have ammunition to arm themselves, if they don't have the necessary fuel to drive their armored vehicles, to repair their armored vehicles, they're not going to be able to fight. And I think that's really what the problem's been. At the national level, rampant corruption and just broad inefficiency from a logistical perspective doomed the Afghan army.
Now,
the
when you
figures
speak
on the ground, they've always had the will to fight, at least in my experience.
Right. When you speak to fellow Americans who have served in Afghanistan, has their interest and motivation to fight been waning down over the past couple of years?
Well, to begin, the United States has an extremely large military, so it's tough to apply any perspective monolithically.
I mean, when you compare it, say, the last couple of years to 2001, I mean, there was a lot of enthusiasm back then.
Your average soldier, the guy and gal on the ground, they want to fight. Not in terms of fighting a losing battle. They just believe in making the lives of the Afghans they work with better. And at the lowest level, that's all we as the troops sent into combat can do. We don't make the decision to commit ourselves to any overseas combat at the military level. It's a civilian decision. And what I've seen is the soldiers on the ground, they still want to do their best to make the lives of the Afghan better. Now, it's just unfortunate that I would argue they've been set up for failure by U.S. government policy decisions.
Well, this goes back to George W. Bush's administration.
From that, and then continuations on. I would argue that over the past 4 administrations, there have been failures with respect to Afghanistan. But with the Bush administration, absolutely, I think there were significant ones, largely in failing to differentiate between the Al-Qaeda terrorists that attacked the United States and their Taliban hosts. And I think when we mixed the idea of holding Al-Qaeda accountable for the September 11th attacks with overthrowing the Taliban and establishing a Western-style democracy in Afghanistan, that any observer of history and current events should realize was a pipe dream, that set us up for 20 years of failure because we didn't have that clear and limited political objective that military force could achieve.
But could the U.S. have pulled out of Afghanistan right after killing Osama bin Laden back in 2010, if I'm not mistaken?
In 2011, yes.
11, right.
I'm sorry, initial question. Was there an option?
Yeah.
I would argue that militarily there's been an option since 2011 to the present day. Politically, the question becomes, can Obama in his first term politically justify the withdrawal from Afghanistan after what happened with his withdrawal from Iraq? And I think politically it wouldn't have happened, despite from a military perspective, I don't think it would make much of a difference.
And finally, has such a messy withdrawal damaged U.S. credibility? I mean, what kind of message is being sent to U.S. allies and friendly regimes throughout the Middle East? I mean, is the U.S. a partner they can count on in the future?
I think this will absolutely raise red flags, and I think it's incumbent upon President Biden and his foreign policy staff over the remainder of his time to help rebuild that credibility. And I think that's something that the United States can and needs to do, because I think plays a significant role in foreign policy throughout the world. And I think our partners need that reassurance after what just happened.
And do you think the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan has already created a power vacuum, a security vacuum, which will most likely be filled by the Chinese or the Russians?
I think the Chinese will certainly move in from an economic perspective. And in terms of regional stability, both China and Russia need a stable Afghanistan. And I think both of those regimes, for better or worse, are far more willing to overlook the human rights abuses of the Taliban regime. And I think that's what we're going to see over the next several years if the Taliban can effectively govern, which is far different than overthrowing a government. I think what we're going to see with Russia and China is engaging on an economic level and ignoring a lot of the human rights abuses that come with that. And I think in the long term, that's going to provide some credibility issues to both of those countries as well. But in terms of the power vacuum, yes, I do believe economically, both China and Russia will play a role filling that quote unquote vacuum.
Right. Maurice, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again.
It's a privilege being with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Zbog svoje strateške lokacije, ali i neiskorištenih prirodnih resursa, Rusija i Kina vide veliki potencijal u Afganistanu. Više detalja u grafici koja slijedi. Idemo sada do Islamabada gdje se nalazi Manzoor Afridi, profesor međunarodnih odnosa na Međunarodnom islamskom univerzitetu u Islamabadu. Professor Manzoor, hello and welcome to Al Jazeera Balkans. Now, let me start by asking you, how does Pakistan view Taliban's takeover of Kabul and of Afghanistan as a whole country? And what do you say to people who accuse Islamabad of orchestrating the Taliban's takeover of Kabul?
Well, Taliban, they have taken over Kabul and most of the areas in Afghanistan. But Taliban, they are Afghan people, and they had already started this war when America and NATO forces, they came into Afghanistan, they were fighting. And of course, there were so many rounds of negotiations from different fora. Half Afghan Taliban, they were engaged in these negotiations, not only with America, but also with other regional and major powers of the world. And all this process, Pakistan was there. For example, Pakistan was in coordination group, QCG, alongside Afghanistan, the People's Republic of China, and United States. And Pakistan was also there when there was Afghan Taliban and US administration talks in Doha. For that reason, Pakistan also released one of the senior leaders of Afghan Taliban, that was Mullah Abdul Ghani Biradar. So now if Taliban, they are there in Kabul and they are going to make their government, of course, if it is after the deal between the Afghan Taliban and the US administration, so now they have been recognized as, as the Afghani people, and these Taliban, they have also visited so many capitals of the world like Beijing and also Moscow and Islamabad and also the United Arab Emirates. So for this reason, after the deal, if they are going to make their government, so it is their choice and it is their right. Now let's see that how they make their government, and the people who accuse Pakistan by orchestrating these Taliban. So if the US has done deal with the Taliban, if People's Republic of China, they welcomed Taliban, then of course Pakistan has nothing to do with them, and Pakistan will see, and I think all these countries, they are having now wait and see policy towards the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Now, what kind of relations does Islamabad want to have with the new government in Kabul, and why would Islamabad prefer to have the Taliban as friends instead of a government such as the recent one led by Ashraf Ghani, which was quite close to and friendly towards India?
If Taliban, they make government exclusively, if all of them, they are Taliban in the government, or if they make a coalition government by having the putting together and having the participation of different sectors of Afghanistan. So of course, it is their own right, it is their own country. And if international community, United Nations and all the major powers, they recognize Taliban as a legitimate government, then of course Pakistan will also recognize it. But now at this situation, of course, many things has to be under consideration. For example, the human rights and some other things, the Taliban behavior with international community and its diplomacy, the international community response towards the Taliban government. So after that, the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, like Pakistan and some others, they will recognize the Taliban, or they may change their policy. But Pakistan sees any kind of government, if it is there in Kabul, of course, I think that there can be extension of recognition. Second thing about the Pakistan's friends in case of such people now at Kabul. So I don't think so. Of course, there was a relationship of Pakistan with the Taliban government back from 1996 to 2001. After that, Pakistan also established its relations with Afghanistan under the Karzai administration, and after that with the Ashraf Ghani. So there were allegations, cross accusations from both Pakistan and Afghanistan. They were leveling against each other, especially it was very much in the Ashraf Ghani era. So that's why the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan, that was mostly strained in the Ghani era. So, but now these things may not happen. Let's hope for that both Pakistan and Afghanistan, they don't accuse each other in future. But any kind of government, regardless of friendly with Pakistan or not, so by international law, if international community recognizes it, then of course Pakistan has to recognize.
Mm-hmm. Now, from your point of view, what have the Taliban learned over the past 20 years? Have they moderated their views? Have they learned the power of PR? And are they telling the West what it wants to hear?
Well, I think now at this stage it is unclear, because now they have not made their government and still they are thinking about it. The whole international community is now waiting for their response, that what kind of reforms they will bring and what kind of freedoms they will give to the Afghani people. But at least if we see the announcements from the Zabihullah Mujahid or Sohail Shaheen, the spokespersons of the Afghan Taliban, they have stated that there will be no ban on music, and but of course they will give their own message to the people about the music, but not complete ban. And second, they said that women, they have the right to do their jobs, and they can go to their own institutions and they can get their education, they can perform their jobs even in media. And they say that there is a general amnesty for all the people, and nobody has to leave Afghanistan. There is freedom to all. So these are the announcements from the Afghan Taliban. Now, whether they will act on it in later days and coming days or not, whether they will implement these reforms and what kind of behavior it will establish with the international community, with the major powers, with the United Nations, with the neighboring countries, and all these elements and these factors, it matter a lot while dealing with the Afghan Taliban. So from the announcements, it is clear that there is little bit, soft corner in the hearts of Taliban. Little bit they are reformed, but still it is unclear as far as the implementation is concerned, that will they implement these announcements into real action. After that, of course, then we can really explain the behavior of Afghan Taliban.
Right. Professor Manzoor, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much once again.
My pleasure, Harun. Thank you.
Poštovani gledalci, iz Islamabada nam se uključio Manzoor Afridi, profesor međunarodnih odnosa. Odluka SAD-a da se povuče i prepusti Afganistan talibanima imat će posljedice širom Južne Azije. Politički lideri i američki saveznici na Bliskom istoku pažljivo prate šta se dešava u Kabulu. Kurdske snage u Iraku i Siriji, kao i vlada u Bagdadu, nemaju mnogo razloga da se raduju i mnogi već dovode u pitanje američku predanost da ih podrži i zaštiti u budućnosti. Haotično američko povlačenje pojačava percepciju među njihovim saveznicima da Washington nije pouzdan partner te da je spreman sklopiti dogovor sa neprijateljem ako to služi njegovim interesima. Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju emisije Granice Istoka. Ako ste propustili bilo koji dio, emisiju možete pregledati na našoj web stranici balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.